Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, March 22nd, 2021. I'm trying to be very deliberate about that. Something like, somehow believe that was a tongue twister heading into it, but it's not so bad. All right, let's see. Organization for this morning. Lots to do, lots to catch up on. A incredible raft of stories piling up in the Greg Dworkin queue. Some stories, some pictures, some comments, but we've got like 26 items in the queue here today. That doesn't mean 26 stories necessarily, but plenty going on, of course, because it's a weekend roundup, and that's what it's all about. Like the hokey pokey, it turns out to be that's what it's all about. All right, like I said, plenty to do this morning. Trying to get my hands working here. Big Boy Scout mulch delivery weekend means a lot of sore muscles and difficulty with the grip today. You know, just one of those days. Grabbing and tossing a couple 100,000 bags of mulch. No small task. And I'm not getting any younger. Like the rest of you, I've discovered time is linear and there's no going back. And but you can throw out your back. That's a totally possible thing to do, and you got to watch out for that. All right, let's see. By the way, now that we are more current with recognizing all of our friendly neighborhood Patreon and PayPal and Cash App donors to the show, I can say we can try now to sort of keep that more current by recognizing them as they come in. So we'll say a big thanks to Mike D, who was already a contributor and has edited his pledge upwards via Patreon. And so I don't know what motivated it, but whatever it was, thanks, and we'll try to continue to do that and make you all happy and encourage you to all do things like that, or run out and recruit new people to listen to the show who will love it and make their pledges that way. But I appreciate it. Thanks very much to Mike D and to all of you. And I think we're up to date, and I would like to, try and remember to do these things like closer to when you do it as an actual thank you to you for doing so. So I do appreciate it. All right. Other things in the news besides Mike D, as it turns out, there's more other things. I have to catch up on what Armando was talking about. Just I happened to see this morning. Feels like a Monday kind of a thing to have to pick up on. Greg can tell already that I'm lost in terms of where to go in the morning for first thing off the bat. But I happened to see Armando responding to somebody this morning. Zach Montellaro, who has written a piece where, I don't know. But let's see. Oh, he's reacting to a piece over at the Daily Beast, which is interesting. I guess it's not his piece. It's from Jessica Huseman. And he's reacting to people's reactions to the piece, doing the folks read the article, for the love of God, read the article first and then tweet thing. And it's like, I don't know. I got to tell you, it's an article. I didn't read the article. I will later, but I will say it is entitled How This Voting Rights Bill, and they're talking about H.R. 1, could turn the next election into a cluster F, which is, they censored themselves slightly by using the asterisk there. And I just was struck by the amount of pushback to the pushback, given that the headline says cluster F in it, and it's like, oh no, we used cluster F in a headline, and people are reacting. What a surprise I am having to this. I just found that kind of interesting. But what an interesting Monday morning thing, and who clears Monday morning articles with cluster F in the headline? I don't know. Oh, this was published on the 20th. I guess that explains it. It was, was that Friday? So it was a TGIF, the other F word, headline thing. I don't know. I find that kind of weird to be terribly concerned about pushback via Twitter to a cluster F headline. But it was a team effort. Jessica Huseman wrote the article, probably would claim she didn't write the headline the way things work. And I guess Zach Montellaro didn't write the headline either, but He's calling for calmer heads and reading for nuance when reading Cluster F titled articles about basic voting rights. So, all right. Well, if you can do that, if you can get your head around that, then you're ready for Monday morning. Greg's ready, I think, so we'll go with him. And I'm not, so I'll just drink tea and listen. How's that? Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. That's always a good plan.
Yeah.
And I want to start by thanking Mike D and everybody else who's contributing to David despite me. I think it's wonderful. So just keep doing that. And since time is a circle, I have to point out that the 20th was Saturday, since today actually is the 22nd, Monday.
Oh, all right.
Which, the reason we have all these things
anyway?
on our computer is to check because, who knows anymore?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know what date it is. I only
feels
know to
like
look
Friday.
at the upper right-hand corner of whatever computer I'm at, and then I'll know. There's no
Right.
reason to know
So,
myself.
it's one of the things that's rather nice about these little mini controversies that you're referring to, be it H.R. 1 versus H.R. 6, the John Lewis original bill, which has provisions in it as to who sues if things go wrong, and that's the purpose of the cluster F point, which may or may not be a good one. But, the thing that the mega story, the meta story that I'm seeing is basically it's nice to get back to arguing these controversies because that's like normal.
Yeah, that's the regular
It's not about, oh, my God, the country is falling apart and that's the end of democracy because fascism is taking over. There's plenty of that still going on. But these other controversies are great,
Sure,
let's have
they
a
feel like good
controversy.
Monday
Let's talk
morning
about it.
things.
It's like, let's get back to normal here.
Yeah, it's a good start, I think.
In fact, the title, the headline, if you will, because we'll talk about headlines.
Sure.
The headline in Pundit Roundup today that I wrote was Biden's tackling governance and our media isn't used to dealing with it.
Oh.
So, the main thing that comes up there, of course, is the border issues, the border crisis, the border humanitarian crisis.
Yes, big story.
The border, political problem, whatever you want to call it.
Big story that it was a big story, too. Yes.
Yeah. Christian Vanderbrook is pointing out something completely different but related. Completely different because it has nothing to do with the border, but related because it has everything to do with how Trump sets everything up.
Oh, okay.
He writes, reminder that one of Trump's final acts was to appoint this guy to a commission responsible for preserving Holocaust-related sites. The guy in question is named Darren Beattie, Beattie. And let me give you a sample of his recent tweets from the 20th, which, again, was Saturday.
So Friday.
Imagine what the world would look like if white people couldn't be controlled with the word racist. We live in a society in which being a racist is considered worse than being ugly, stupid, and lazy. I mean, he actually wrote this. Okay.
Well, I mean, okay.
Wait, there's more. But see, the point I'm making is how Trump sets things up and then, lets the media say, oh, my gosh, look, everything in the world is a cluster F. So, I mean, and that's the point here. Who cares if somebody's racist? Is that really the summum malum? Move on. The only reason the word matters is it's used to control white people, and white people allow it.
Wow.
The best response of who cares if somebody's racist? Not that big a deal. How about we get back to the business of doing great things and not being a joke country? This is the guy that Trump...
Yeah, he'll be.
Here's the New York Times headline. I recognize it right from the font, even though it's not credited. Jewish group denounces White House pick for preservation commission. Darren Beattie was fired as a speechwriter in 2018 for attending a conference with white nationalists. This week, he was appointed to a commission that helps preserve sites related to the Holocaust. What's that got to do with the border? When Trump sets things up to fail, and then they fail, and then you point to the guy trying to clean it up, that's the problem. So agenda setting. All three broadcast morning shows, says Matt Gertz, not to be confused with Matt Gaetz. Agenda setting. All three broadcast morning shows referring to the situation at the border as a crisis. Prediction. Biden press conference that journalists have been saying is essential for weeks devolves into fixation on whether border situation is a crisis, in quotes, followed by online criticism of journalists for so doing, followed by huffiness.
Well, that's probably true.
That's undoubtedly true. Now, let's turn to a sober-minded, clear-headed expert on this. a few. But let's start with my own Chris Murphy from Connecticut. The Biden administration was handed a mess from Trump, and they're moving as fast as they can to clean it up. See why I was giving you these stories about the white nationalists that Trump put in various and sundry places? You set yourself up for failure, then it fails, and then you point your finger and say, look, you failed. For example, Trump ended the program where kids could apply for asylum before coming to the U.S., and now their only recourse is to show up at the border. And by the way, in addition to that, he dismantled any place for them to stay.
Right.
So you do those two things, and then all of a sudden you find that there's a lot of people on the border. How many? Not as many as in the Bush administration. Not as many as 2 or even 3 years earlier. There was, as of January 2021, people apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border each month, 78,323 in January. It was over 200,000 in 2000. Year 2000, over 200,000 per month. We're at 78,323. Now, all of a sudden, Republicans are pointing this because they don't want to talk about sedition. They don't want to talk about insurrection. They don't want to talk about how well the COVID planning that the Biden administration is doing. They only want to talk about this. And so truly, they're setting the agenda for media by saying you have to talk about this and nothing else because you have to write that Republicans are only focusing on this like a laser and nothing else and ignoring everything else. So you have to as well. And that's what's happening.
Well, it was a plan.
It was a plan. So Dave Rothkopf says, another expert, perhaps a little context is in order. The prior administration's policies serially violated human rights and were profoundly cruel. When this administration ended these policies, it was inevitable that immigrants seeking hope in the U.S. would return to the border.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Sure.
This administration's crisis, again, in scare quotes, and scare quotes is what it deserves, is that it's more humane and decent than its predecessors, acting more consistently with international and domestic law. It's a direct result of doing the right thing in the right way, and they're actively seeking to manage it. Hence my headline.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
Biden is tackling issues and trying to govern, and the media can't deal with it because it's not conflict. Ascribing blame, as the Meet the Press framing does, is deeply misleading. It's a political crisis for the new president with no easy way out, says Meet the Press.
Yes.
Okay. Is this an issue requiring urgent action? Yes, but it's also a situation created by the repugnant behavior of the last administration and the ongoing aspiration so many have to come to America. It's a major challenge for the Biden administration, but it's no way their fault. They're fixing something that was profoundly broken under Trump and in different ways under prior administrations. Let's frame it that way rather than misleading oversimplification. And then points to Greg Sargent piece. The latest GOP attack on Biden has a huge hole in it. Okay. A crisis relative to what? That's why I was talking about the Bush administration.
Okay.
What's missing is a serious comparison with the pre-Biden status quo. It's as if the current situation exists in a vacuum. Before there was no crisis, now there's a crisis. The number of people coming across was higher under the Trump administration. But that doesn't stop Republicans by saying it's Biden's fault because he told them to come. You can summarize their entire critique as that. That's why when Kevin McCarthy did their let's go to the border and do some theater, and reporters asked him, well, what's your alternative? He didn't have anything to say. Yeah. That wasn't the point.
Right.
They don't have any alternative. They, in fact, have a semi-alternative, which is articulated by Joe Scarborough this morning on Morning Joe, which is, this is horrible that Biden is doing this because he's inviting them in. How is he doing that? He's saying, we're not going to kill you and be so cruel as the last administration, and that's a tacit invitation. And how dare he, and it's his fault.
Aha.
And I heard that and said, what? What are you talking about? He went on about this for a half hour.
Yeah, I can believe it. I don't know. I don't know how else to...
Right. Yeah, we're not going to kill you. It's a tacit invitation for you to come. That is their line.
Well, try it as a tourism line in whatever state you prefer, Joe, and see how it goes. Come to Florida.
To visit us.
We're not going to kill you.
We won't kill you. Promise.
Yeah. Right. I mean,
we won't eat you.
Yeah. I mean, like I guess New Jersey might be able to get away with that. We will not boil you and
have you for dinner. I promise.
Yeah.
I mean, those other incidents were just like one-offs. I promise you that won't happen.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I don't mind the Republicans doing this. They have nothing else. The media falling for it, hook, line, and sinker, is a clear and obvious example of knowing nothing about policy, not caring about policy.
Yeah.
They see conflict. They want to cover it. That's it. Oh, and it comes with visuals.
True. Some of which they created themselves. I did see one of the Sunday shows flew their panel down to do an outdoor thing at the border. They called it a round table, and by the way, there was no table and it wasn't round. But aside from that, what were they doing? Why did you do that? I did not really understand what the point of having people outdoors to debate the issue, not fix it or look at it, just sit near it really was. But they spent an awful lot of money doing it, even though I did see somebody else comparing their last week's headlines to this week. Here they are down at the border having their non-round round table to talk about the problem going on in the background, whereas last week's big Sunday outrage was, hey, Biden keeps going back to Delaware when we're supposed to be avoiding unnecessary travel.
Right, but that really isn't going to fly because nobody cares. So they're glomming on this, and that's what they'll do for a while. But there is other news going on. Meanwhile, interestingly, the New York Times is playing with their headlines a little bit. I sent you a copy, a picture I took of our in-print version. It's our local paper, along with the Danbury News Times and the Hartford Courant. I see it. All of which we subscribe to because it's good to stay up on the news and, support journalists, even though you get mad at them sometimes. But television is a different animal. So the New York Times says, untruths flow from Senator shaking trust. Conspiracy spread by Wisconsin's Johnson. And it's a whole story about how Ron Johnson's a liar, but they can't say liar because it's the New York Times. So in their print version, they have untruths flow, shaking trust. And their online version is assaulting the truth. Ron Johnson helps erode confidence in government.
All right.
Right? They can't say lie. Lying about everything. Ron
But
Johnson is a jerk would be the proper headline. They can't do that.
Fuster.
And the idea that it's helping erode confidence in government, that's not true. That's not what he's doing. Because if you ask him, are you eroding confidence in government? He'd say, damn right, smaller is better. You got to get rid, all the other nonsense. What he's doing is eroding confidence in truth, the rule of law, justice, all that stuff, democracy. Yes. And those are far more important.
Yes, that's a good point.
That's what he's doing. So he's pushing a false theory on the virus, the vaccine, and the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Mr. Johnson, the Republican senator from Wisconsin, has absorbed his party's transformation under Donald Trump. Now, I pointed out to a American politics historian that he is from the same state as Joe McCarthy. She pointed out in her view, in her actually educated view, far more educated than mine, there's really no direct correlation because Joe McCarthy was from a different strain of the Republican Party than is active now in Wisconsin, in her view, although she welcomed other theories on that. But, as far as being disgraceful, well, that's the same category. That's in the same bracket. He's in the bracket as worst American senator. I'm not saying that he's going to win. You can never tell these things. There's always an upset. But, he's absolutely a number one seed.
That's true. He's doing well in that sense. Yeah, I don't know how fair it is to blame them for it, but they roundly condemn everyone from the state. Sure,
they elected him. They elected Scott Walker. They elect people who are absolutely positively Neanderthal in their thinking.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, well, the Republican Party there is very aggressive, to be sure.
And not just there, to be sure.
Yes.
So, we have things going on in Georgia, which is sort of kind of odd because they tried to get rid of Sunday voting and that didn't fly. So they're trying some other things, including expanding voting, to see if that'll go. So there's some interesting things happening in Georgia voter suppression, which may or may not turn out to be, terrible. So we shall see. But here's a story, again, from the where is this from? This is from the New York Times. In restricting early voting, the right sees a new center of gravity. Donald Trump is no longer center stage, but many conservative activists are finding that the best way to raise money and keep voters engaged is to make his biggest fabrication their top priority. So, you could argue that Ron Johnson is doing all of this, saying that the big lie, the big, steal happened because it helps him raise money for a campaign that he's not sure he's going to commit himself to.
Right.
His reelection, I think, is in 2022, should it happen. But at the same time, this is absolutely Republican thinking at just about every state level. At every state level, you have to condemn people and censure, whatever that means, people like Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski. And, of course, it doesn't work in Utah and it doesn't work in Alaska, but you're supposed to do it anyway for reasons that are unknown. And at the same time, you have to try voter suppression as best you can, and then you have to admit that if H.R. 1, the bill that started this whole discussion with the cluster F headline, if H.R. 1 actually passes, that's the end of the Republican Party. We'll never get elected again because they're saying that openly.
That would be terrific. It's just I don't think that it will really be that. And, of course, it's not Democrats saying that.
I would like to put that to the test. I'd like to enact a bill, and let's see if they're right.
Well, right, exactly. See if we'll put your money where your mouth is. Let me see if it's the end of the Republican Party. And
I don't think it will be. I think it benefits them as much as it hurts them. But they are of the mindset that, look what happened in the last election. We lost because people voted, so we can't have that.
Okay. I mean, I know they think so. And they may even be right about one thing. But it would be surprising if they turned out to be right about something.
Well, Democrats in disarray, listen to this. Their efforts are intensifying over the objections of some Republicans who say the strategy is cynical and short-sighted, arguing it further commits the party to legitimizing a lie. That also sends a message. They say that Republicans think they lost mostly because the other side cheated, which prevents them from grappling honestly with what went wrong and why they might lose again.
Have another autopsy.
That setting new restrictions on voting could undercut the party, just as it was making important gains with Black and Latino voters. Restricting voting is only a short-term rush. It's not a strategy for future strength, says Ben Ginsburg, one of the Republican Party's most prominent election lawyers, who's criticized Mr. Trump and other party members for attacking the integrity of the voting process. And simultaneously to that, 9 of the 10 Republicans who supported impeaching former President Trump have banded together for the first time to express dismay over Democrats challenging a race in Iowa, arguing it'll undermine confidence in the electoral process.
Okay, I mean, I wasn't even aware that they were continuing with that challenge. I thought that was kind of over with.
Right. Pro-impeachment House Republicans object to Democratic probe of a narrow win. So, the thing is, when you get to close races, there's going to be vicious infighting over what to do with it.
Yes.
Right. Somebody wins by 3 points or a coin toss. Do you take it to the House? Do you let the House decide? Do you redo it? Do you relitigate? Do you recount? Do you pay for a recount? Do you recount 5 times? Do you challenge the votes that were thrown out for X, Y, and Z when it's only a 6-vote margin? These things are complicated. I get all of that. But to make it a national issue when, in fact, it's usually a local problem, is one of those things that politicians do, particularly if they figure they could raise money off of it.
I guess so, but yeah, I haven't seen anybody do it. So, I was surprised to see that come up again. I did see someone raise it as an issue. I guess it must be headed towards a hearing or two in the House Administration Committee. But,
well, there's an investigation going on, the House race in Iowa's 2nd District.
Yeah.
After a recount, Republican Marionette Miller Meeks was declared the winner over Democrat Rita Hart with a difference of 6 votes out of 400,000 cast. Yeah. And Hart alleges that 22 legally cast ballots were not considered during the November canvass and subsequent recount, resulting in the tightest congressional electoral outcome in modern history. The House Administration Committees launched a probe, and they object to the probe.
I see. I don't know. It's interesting. They object to all these probes. Probing of the insurrection is out. Probing of the things where Republicans win.
Yeah, I mean, if they had voted to probe the insurrection, they'd be on a lot stronger ground, in my view. I mean, in that case, you're simply saying, look, close elections happen.
Well, I guess.
And counts are never going to be perfect, and there's always going to be one or two that are going to be contested. And in this country, you accept that you won and the other guy lost and vice versa. And that's true, and that's why the insurrection was terrible, so we voted against it, except they didn't.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, did we begin this by saying that it was the Republicans who voted for impeachment?
Yes.
That said that?
Yes,
okay,
9
so
of the
were
10
all right
Republicans who supported impeachment
right.
don't want this to like be the norm all the time that you go
right.
ahead. They're basically saying you win, you lose, you lose. Now leave it alone. There's always going to be shenanigans, and you don't look that closely.
I guess. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I'm glad they voted for impeachment, but yeah.
But they voted against insurrection. You don't even have to look it up.
They?
You know that because zero of the Republicans, were in this situation where they were unhappy about that.
All right. Well, I don't know. We'll see. I guess I thought that their voting for the impeachment meant that they were, that they were voting to hold him accountable for the insurrection. But
it's hard to know. I mean, are they going to say, okay, fine, we're going to talk to the Chamber of Commerce and we agree anybody who supported insurrection should not be funded.
I guess that's true.
It's our party.
They won't be doing that.
Well, clean house. None of that stuff.
Okay, I'm willing to.
I think
we should have
simply
a
look. We did the right thing in a performative way. Stop looking that close.
Okay. I thought we had decided to stop looking at all, but I guess it was referred to the committee as opposed to simply accepting the results. So
yes.
Okay.
The objective.
Fine. Well, we'll have a look at it in the committee. We owe everybody that much, and then you just don't do anything about it. That's a possibility. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll continue on with our weekend roundup. I heard there was some COVID or something this weekend, so I guess
we'll talk about that. Maybe all these people who were yelling at Joe Biden because he's inviting people in with bad consequences were confusing him with Ron DeSantis, because apparently that's what's happening in Florida.
Yeah, that's weird.
Come on down here and infect us. Oh, wait a minute. You guys are partying. I'm shocked that such a thing is happening here in Florida during spring break. Yeah. I'm going to have to close everything down. Curfews after 8 o'clock. We'll pepper spray the crowds to try to break them up because, what could possibly go wrong?
Okay. I can't think of anything. They're pretty sure it's over. A guy on spring break said so. I saw it on TV.
Absolutely. So I want to finish a little thought here.
All right.
Which Brian Beutler points out. One of the articles that caught my attention was this perspective in the Washington Post about H.R. 1, the Voting Rights Bill.
Yes.
Which basically says H.R. 1 can't pass the Senate, but here are some voting reforms that could. Smaller, more targeted bill might attract enough support. How you should, play the usual Washington insider game of taking something that you don't think can politically pass and making it palatable by making it smaller. This is the excellent voter rights lawyer Richard Hasen. And in the old days, that's what you would do. And then you turn to the other side and say, here's the compromise. Let's go with this. And then you hash something out between the two positions, and then you vote for it. But those days are gone forever, which people don't seem to have wrapped their heads around. Oh. Nowadays, it's a completely different game. And Brian Beutler takes this piece and says, look, I think this gets the game theory wrong. H.R. 1 needs to advance as is so that jittery senators have pounds of flesh they can demand be removed. Now, this gets back to all the criticism of Joe Manchin, and maybe everything is actually being done the right way. You put stuff, everything you possibly want in, move the Overton window, as it were, do a labor negotiation, realize some of it will get cut out, not by their side, but by your side.
Okay.
And say, okay, fine, that extra one thing that you want cut out, all right, that's the compromise, we'll do it. And then it passes. And that's the game. Okay. So, if you allow Joe Manchin to do this, that's great. That's a win-win. It's a win for him because he's independent, and it's a win for you because you got 98% of what you wanted.
All right.
In other words, Joe Manchin is the principled opposition that used to be Republicans, but they've abandoned that in favor of voter suppression and fascism. And if fascism upsets you to say that, think of it as authoritarianism.
Okay.
Right? If that makes you more comfortable, that's fine. You don't like liberal, you want to use progressive, whatever. Basically, they are no longer the principal opposition. People like Manchin and Sinema are, and that's fine. We can work with them. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of don't negotiate with yourself actually is backwards. Absolutely negotiate with yourself. You're the majority.
Oh, I guess if you can arrange for...
Don't negotiate with yourself when you're the minority. That's ridiculous. When you're in the majority, you can do that.
All right.
Well, you're only a majority by maybe one. Okay, so only negotiate with maybe one. So put everything in you want, let Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema take it out, and then get the rest of what you want, and everybody's fine. So Beutler turned this tactical disagreement into a whole thing about how Democrats have happened upon a new governing paradigm for the era of GOP nihilism. And it's great.
Okay.
Now, parallel with that, Greg Sargent, and this is all in the pundit roundup, Greg Sargent says an intriguing reason that Republicans may want to keep the filibuster is basically they're so weak they can't even pass anything with 50 votes. There's no Republican priority that could get 50 votes because Democrats in disarray. I mean, they're so messed up, they can't agree about anything. And the things that they do want to pass that they probably could get 50 votes for are so deeply unpopular in the country that, like they would all vote to take everybody's religious rights away unless you're an evangelical. I mean, they would do that. And they would get 50 votes for it. And it would be so deeply unpopular, it would ruin their reelection chances.
Okay.
They would do stuff like that. So McConnell is saying, we can't afford to let you loose and vote on things you want, and things that the country would want, you can't get your act together to do anything about it. Like overturning Obamacare. Remember that one?
Yes, I do.
They can't get enough votes to do anything that's actually governance. They're not a governance party. They haven't been for years. And so McConnell's trying to save them from themselves. So he doesn't want a simple majority. Keep the filibuster. This way works for us, and we can just be the party and no. But if you ask, basically, getting rid of the filibuster in simple terms means you're asking us to govern. We can't.
That's an interesting angle on it, right? Okay, if there's no filibuster, then we either have to decide we're not for this terrible thing that the country hates, or vote for it and lose when 2 or 3 of our senators at least turn and run from it. Well,
he's
that's
probably right.
Counterintuitive.
That's probably the situation here. And what it comes down to is the Republicans are simply not set up to govern. No, which is, again, the context that you have to put this whole brouhaha about the border.
Okay.
Right? They are much more comfortable pointing a finger and saying, you're doing it wrong, than giving a single idea about how to do it. Oh, yes.
Oh, no doubt about that. That's clear enough.
So the big picture is that's true for governance writ large, and that's true for this issue in particular. So, you could see why McConnell, we want power, but don't ask us to govern. We don't know how.
We just want to, take money out of the system and put it in our bank accounts, I guess. I don't know what he's up to, but it is interesting, though, that, of course, his big threat is, well, if you change the filibuster, we're gonna do all those things, and then he listed all the terrible things that are actually highly unpopular and said he was going to do them. So I mean, this is a supposition. It could mean, who knows? In McConnell's head, he could really want those things, I suppose. But yeah, I guess we're in the business
McConnell
of
may
believing.
want certain things, but he knows his caucus.
Yes, I think so. I don't know.
Right.
Some of them are a little unknowable, but yeah. Well, I mean, it's an interesting alternative theory, and it's that much more intriguing when you have to sort that out. Like, okay, that does seem to make a lot of nuanced sense. Like, maybe that is a very savvy take, but then again, I do see him on the floor insisting that the end of the filibuster means I will bring these things to the floor and pass them. But
And this is
could be
why
bluffing. Surely, but
GOP warns H.R. 1 could be absolutely devastating for Republicans. Some openly fret that broader access to voting will harm the party's chances.
could be a cluster F for them.
H.R. 1, known as the For the People Act, seeks to abolish hurdles to voting, reform the role of money in politics, and tighten federal ethics rules. You can see right there why he has an issue with it.
Oh, no. Yeah, all right.
Right? For Republicans, H.R. 1 represents a Democratic power grab that could tilt elections in their favor for years to come.
Power grab.
Right?
Power acceptance.
One Arizona state lawmaker called it anti-Republican.
Well, it is. I mean, it turns out to be. Because
Right.
Republicans are against letting people vote. I'm anti that.
Right? And some Republican lawmakers, officials, and strategists go even further, says this ABC News piece,
Further.
signaling the GOP's opposition to such extensive electoral reforms is based on the fear it'll cause them to lose elections. Jay Williams, a Republican strategist in Georgia, says if the Democrats pass H.R. 1, it's going to be absolutely devastating for Republicans in this country. They're just going to basically just shaft so many Republicans in places where they could actually have opportunities to pick up.
Okay.
All right. And the problem is what?
Yeah, I'm not certain what's wrong with that. I mean, I get their idea that, okay, well, we'll lose. Well, it's not H.R. 1 that will make Republicans lose. It's being unpopular that will make Republicans lose.
The problem for Republicans is that you have to look at places like North Carolina, Ohio, and Kentucky. More people voted, and the Republicans did fine.
Yeah.
So Kentucky's Republican Secretary of State says, I think it's a mistake for Republicans to believe that under any particular voting model they can't win. I think that's wrong and absurd, but it's the same error the Democrats are making trying to push H.R. 1. Right? Saying all we need is high turnout and we win. We know that's not true. Didn't happen with Clinton versus Trump.
Okay.
I mean, it did with the popular vote, but not in the places that accounted for the electoral vote.
All right.
And Democrats, for their part, point to the wholesale Republican push to curb voting rights as the impetus for more urgently pressing ahead on H.R. 1, which could serve as a backstop to thwart the state-level clampdown on voting. So, there's a debate to be had there, and both sides have their points, and, one is a Democratic point, and the other is a authoritarian point.
Yeah.
But they both have their points. So that's the setup, and so that's why, putting a bill like H.R. 1, which may have some things that Joe Manchin doesn't find acceptable, allowing him to pull some of it out and passing the rest, that'd be fine.
It might be. I guess it depends.
You'd have
I'd
to get
like
rid of
see
the
which
filibuster
ones
for it
they
to
are.
happen, but, that'd be fine too.
Yeah.
Or you could just carve it out and say, just for this one bill, we're getting rid of the filibuster. And why can you do that? Because you can.
Yeah. I mean, I don't love it, but
I don't love any of it, but, I don't love having to,
We'll do it to
use
own
the
the,
filibuster or get rid of the
own the
filibuster. But,
fascists.
when you're trying to get people not to vote, that's kind of a fundamental thing.
I guess that's true. And I don't know, it was a winning strategy for one cycle, right? To say, oh, well, we'll own the libs that'll be our chief goal in life. Okay, well, we'll own the fascists just for this one bill.
Yeah. Worked out well in Germany.
Yeah.
So,
Well, now they
meanwhile, Ron DeSantis is inviting everybody to spread COVID all over Florida.
sure,
So
go
that's
back
the
home
bad
to
news.
die.
But the good news is
Yeah.
AstraZeneca comes out with data today. U.S. clinical data of its trial of its COVID-19 vaccine is showing 79% efficacy at preventing symptomatic disease. If you get your vaccine, you're not going to be symptomatic. 100% efficacy against severe or critical disease and hospitalization. So far, nobody's promising it's going to be 100% forever. But as James Hamlin points out,
promise.
so far, global deaths from COVID are very roughly 2.7 million.
Okay.
We have 500,000 of that right here.
Right.
But very roughly 2.7 million around the globe. So far, global deaths from COVID vaccines, roughly zero.
How roughly? Exactly?
A lot less roughly, like
Okay.
pretty precisely. But again, no guarantees that's going to be true forever.
Right.
If you've got 55 million deaths in some future era, but one death from COVID vaccine, you see, when you said zero, you lied. Well, right
Right.
now, it's zero. It's not a guarantee it'll always be zero.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you don't go to the hospital if you get your vaccine. You don't need to. But that's not going to be true forever. Somebody might go. So it's not a
Eventually.
guarantee for you personally.
I forgot my wallet at the hospital. Something
Yeah.
like that.
The thing is that when you say something like COVID's dangerous or it can put you in the ICU or this or that,
Yeah.
it's not a guarantee to you personally. You know, it's a look at the statistics and look at the population. And if you say, yes, but I'm the exception to the rule, and therefore, well, you know, you're just going off in the wrong direction.
Sure.
There will be exceptions, but this looks like the situation here. And that's, you know, important.
Okay.
So we also, last week, were starting to talk
79%
about the
not
fact that the European Union is having issues with the vaccine. They temporarily pulled the AstraZeneca vaccine, the one we were just talking about, because of concerns about blood clots. It turns out that there's no issues. Safety cleared, back on track. This U.S. Look also looked at blood clots, no issues. And so that's where the science is. And so Dave Keating is taking a look at the overall big picture of what was going on in the EU. I keep seeing the line EU is having vaccine problems because it was too slow in negotiating contracts, repeated in British and American media. In other words, the American approach of throwing money at the companies with Operation Warp Speed worked, and Britain had also a separate guarantee when they worked with Oxford AstraZeneca, but it wasn't simply a matter of putting money in. So Dave Keating says, I want to push back on this narrative because I think it's missing where the real EU level mistake lies. And let's review what happened in the past year. And I'm going to talk about the COVID vaccines in Europe, but think about the border with US and Mexico as well. AstraZeneca signed purchasing agreement with the EU one day before its agreement with the UK. So the EU actually came first. AstraZeneca CEO told a hearing last month, European Parliament, that UK priority comes from research funding agreement that Oxford signed with the UK in January, February 2000, inherited by AstraZeneca when it partnered with Oxford in May 2020. So Oxford signed a funding agreement with the UK, I guess in a similar fashion, if you will, roughly, with what Operation Warp Speed did with some of the companies, other than the companies with American guarantees of buying their product, which is what helped them bring it to market. Now, Keating says UK was smart to start funding the vax research before COVID even hit Europe, because at this particular point in time, it was Italy, but not all of Europe.
Oh, I see.
But they made a consequential choice by apparently making funding conditional to the Brits getting doses of any resulting vaccine first.
Oh. So.
Germany funded BioNTech, that's a German company, but didn't include Europe First clause. Germany went with the free market, and the UK and the US said, our people first, then we'll give the rest.
Yeah, because something. I don't know.
Politics, you know, and it's understandable why they would do that.
Yeah.
But they did that, and Germany didn't. Meanwhile, in March 2020, Trump tried unsuccessfully to steal BioNTech from Germany and bring the company to the U.S.
Yeah. Although,
Despite this warning, apparently nobody in the EU thought it might be a bad idea for BioNTech to be partnered with Pfizer.
Wait a minute.
Okay. That German nationality agnostic approach to pharma partners was not the approach used in the UK. Oxford was originally going to partner with American company Merck, and the UK overruled it and said, you got to partner with AstraZeneca because AstraZeneca is in the UK.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, consistent with their Brexit and whatnot.
Yes. And that's because there's a story here from Sky News. That's because the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was very nearly the Oxford Merck vaccine. Merck is now the company that's working with J&J. So Merck was set up to help all along. And under the terms of the agreement with the American pharmaceutical giant, there was no guarantees of supply. The episode played out against a backdrop of the first phase of the pandemic. During March and April, University of Oxford negotiated a deal which would allow Merck to manufacture and distribute the vaccine. The arrangement made sense. Unlike British, Swedish AstraZeneca, Merck had experience in making vaccines. And it had links to Oxford scientists and government advisors. And when the contract reached Matt Hancock's desk, the former advisor said the health secretary refused to approve it because it didn't include provisions specifically committing to supply the UK first. The fear was export controls, not from the EU, but from the US. Mr. Hancock was worried that Trump would stop vaccines from Merck leaving the country.
Yeah, he might have tried something like that.
With the university and Merck as close to signing on the dotted line as they could be, he stopped it going ahead because he didn't want to risk the intellectual property rights of the Oxford vaccine ending up in the hands of a single American company. The British concern over American vaccine nationalism turned out to be well-founded. With BioNTech-Pfizer partnership secure, Trump seemed to be in no hurry to sign Pfizer purchase contracts. Why? He knew a U.S. vaccine export ban would make a contract unnecessary. Pfizer had massive production capacity in the U.S. If U.S. law prevented any of those doses made on U.S. soil from being exported, they would have to go to the U.S. in any event. And the result can be seen in the supply chain. U.S. plants used to supply U.S., European plants used to supply the world. Sure enough, Trump signed an executive order in December 2020 giving Americans first priority to any vaccines made on U.S. territory. That was largely symbolic. Trump and Biden have instead used the Defense Production Act as a legal basis for the ban. And in December 2020, the UK and the US used the emergency use authorization method to approve Pfizer, while the EU used conditional marking and approval, resulting in EU approving 2 to 3 weeks later. The UK gave emergency use to AstraZeneca, and when the EU gave conditional marking approval to AstraZeneca, the company informed the EU by then it would not be meeting original doses because of production problems, and seems those doses were already reserved and went to the UK. And so the EU and the UK started battling over who gets what. And, the big picture writ large is that the US and the UK were playing nationalism hardball. EU wasn't. EU wound up with a shortage of vaccine and their third wave.
Okay. Well, that's a drawback. I mean, the whole, I guess they could have foreseen it. The idea of the EU, of course, would be to tamp down on nationalism getting in the way of free markets anyway, and they were true to principle. And then the one who quit the EU and said we'll look out for ourselves first, well, I guess in individual instances that'll work just fine, and then they can all go back healthy, and they can all go back to complaining about not being able to go to their vacation.
Don't lose sight of the fact, folks out there listening, that a lot of this had to do with Trump.
Yes.
And so, what I'm saying is you play the nationalism card, it's going to be short-term gain, long-term pain. And that's what happened. And you can see Trump's nationalism actually causing the UK to go in that direction, which is causing friction with the EU now, and waves of vaccine shortages resulting in waves of virus spread. And that's not good for the U.S. in the long term, because what happens in the world is going to wind up affecting us. You go back and look at the border here. If you're going to completely play the nationalism game, and that's all you're going to do, and say we don't really care what happens to them so long as we throw them out of the U.S. and keep them in Mexico in squalid conditions, not our problem. You have to go back to root cause, and you have to fix what's going on in South America and Central America, which, by the way, a lot of that is climate. So the floods and hurricanes are ruining people's livelihoods, leading to unstable governments, violence, people fleeing because the life there is not acceptable. And it's not because Biden said, yes, come here. He said the opposite. But when you're forced to move, you move. And then if you set up the situation where you're going to dismantle any help to keep people down there, help their governments, pay them to stay there, would be a better situation than what we have right now. And on the north of the border, dismantling any facilities to take care of them, then you have what you have now. Chris Murphy's absolutely right about all of this. And so it's all tied in together. And it all stems from ultranationalism giving you a short-term gain and a long-term pain. And that's true with the vaccine. It's true with this. And it's important to keep that in mind when you look at the whole big picture.
Oh, all right. We can do that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to tell you about this one. This is, I'm sure that the advocates of it say, well, short term, long term. But who cares? I'm out of here.
Yeah, long term, we're all dead. Right now, I got an election win.
Yeah, basically, I guess. It's a little disappointing given that, the foundation of the European Union was all about eliminating that.
I'm just saying, comment on the media when you cover these things. You really ought to cover it in depth, not just Republicans and Democrats are arguing about that. Who's got the upper hand? There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah.
Well, it's all Biden. Well, there's a lot more to it than that.
That's certainly true. Okay, well, disappointing, and I don't know. I guess Europe. I'm sure they're struggling to get what they want, but they do have some significant supply, and they are doing considerably better than non-European Union Europe. Eastern and Central Europe is having a hell of a time controlling things. So, from my view of those daily numbers, still jumping in increments in Eastern and Central Europe that we used to see happening here in the United States, in the individual states, and as a country as a whole, and in Western Europe, but
you sound like my grandmother. It could always be worse.
Yeah, well, and believe me, Central and Eastern Europe will be happy to introduce you to how it could be worse in almost anything, quite honestly.
So, again, good news. Israel's Ministry of Health just put out a statement saying both the ministry and the OBGYN Association have recommended pregnant women get the vaccine. There are greater risk of complications with new variants and set up a special hotline for questions. They're not seeing issues with the vaccine. They are seeing issues with the virus. Okay. That's true for flu virus, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but it's recommended that pregnant women get the vaccine because the complications of flu are pretty significant in pregnant women. That doesn't mean that people will automatically line up to get it. It's always been a problem, but with COVID, especially true.
Okay. Well, I didn't really know what the rule was for flu vaccine for pregnant women. I'm not pregnant, and it's been a while since that was
right. That to me is
the
perfect example of why you simply can't tell people what to do.
Yeah. All right. Well.
Right, but at the same time, go with the science and go with the facts, and that's what the science and the facts say.
Yes, even if it's not. It would be nice if people went with the science and the facts. That was another of the weekend things that I happened to see fly by was the polling that says Trump voters, what did they say, 50% of Trump voters insisting that they won't get the vaccine. And was it Asa Hutchinson dismissing that as well? That's just, Republican natural resistance to government interference in your life. And I thought
that's okay. Let it come from him.
I guess, but
it's good for Republicans to tell Republicans what's going on. I mean, there was a lot more on that. I think I had in the pundit roundup, Yamish Shalcindor followed up a little bit on that discussion that Frank Luntz was having.
Oh dear, yeah.
With Republican voters, and basically went out and found very, very similar things. They're persuadable. But they don't want to be told what to do. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you why you should do it. Simple as that.
I guess so. I found it weird. Like, one, the idea that there was anything natural about resisting government per se was weird. But then the other thing being they were resisting the vaccine because they resist government. Remember the privately developed vaccine that's being offered on a voluntary basis. It's so tyrannical. Obviously, you're going to want it's natural resistance to not being particularly pressured to do anything that you don't want to do, even though it's a pretty good idea and science recommends it. But what it is of course natural resistance to science or things that look like they might make us look like we were wrong because we were the ones saying this whole thing was a hoax.
Right. And my final piece, as we get to the end of the hour here. And I'll be back on Wednesday if I forget to tell you. And thank you all for contributing to David, despite what I'm doing. Vaccine mystery in Politico just came across my threshold here, and I just thought it was interesting. Vaccine mystery, why Johnson & Johnson shots aren't reaching more arms. The single-shot vaccine was supposed to be the catalyst for the country's return to normalcy. Instead, it's sparking confusion and finger-pointing. The Biden administration says they're sending it out to states. States say they don't have any.
Oh.
Almost 3 weeks after the FDA authorized the shots, no one appears to be able to explain why immunizations are lagging. Some states are thought to be intentionally holding back shots.
What?
And others say it takes time to inoculate people like the homebound.
Okay.
Right? What's clear is around 2.3 million of the 4.3 million doses of the vaccine have been administered. Between 140,000 and 200,000 doses have made it into people's arms in recent days.
Yeah.
But it highlights the challenges you have. We're just going to be Israel by the time we get finished vaccinating. Well, it's not going to be smooth for a variety of reasons. Republicans who don't want it, trying to figure out what the states are doing. I was just reading about one of my New Hampshire friends having trouble with the sign-up because they decided to move away from the government federal VAMS, Vaccine Administration Management System site, to their own, and you couldn't get on, and it would freeze. I mean, things are happening to not make it smooth. And you can't distribute the vaccine equitably if there aren't enough doses. So first you have to get enough doses. And because states have the final say in how their allotments are distributed, some are using the J&J vaccine on populations harder to reach for a second shot appointment, and others are putting speed over equity and sending out the shots broadly. So, you're going to have different results in different places.
Okay. Well, yes. I want to read a little bit more about this one. Like I said, they got snapped up like crazy the minute they hit the market here, but
right.
We have a highly educated
Right, but if states are saving it for the people who need it, and the people who need it aren't getting it, that's a problem. That means nobody's getting it.
You should get those two together, the people who need it and the people you're saving it for. That'd be a great idea. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Okay, well, I would like to find out a little bit more. I think I'm a little confused about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine situation. And it's too late for me. I've already started down the Pfizer course, but I was kind of interested in getting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and maybe saying something about it on the air and encouraging people to get it after that weird situation with Detroit, which apparently did get reversed early on, but I thought it might be a good idea to jump in and get this thing. But like I said, it was snapped up very quickly around here, and there was no chance of getting it anytime real soon. But it reminds me that, I think I've heard this situation, this idea of, the federal government saying, we've sent it out, and states saying, we didn't get it, and that is actually very Trump sounding. I mean, didn't we go through this with Trump, and then it kind of, as I recall, that whole situation sort of culminated with the, we said we had a stockpile for second shots, but we'll just send that out now to try to relieve the pressures for getting first shots in people, and then they found out very shortly thereafter that no, there was no stockpile at all. They had already sent it out, and they were very far behind on production, and everybody said very Trumpian to have arrived at this situation. And are we back at the same place with Johnson & Johnson here, or am I misunderstanding things? Well, let's see. How long will it take to find out? Not too bad. Let's run through it just because we're already halfway down the path here. Aaron Banco and Rachel Rubin with the byline here for Politico. Again, the headline, Vaccine Mystery, Why J&J's Shots Aren't Reaching More Arms. And the answer is either the arms or the needles aren't long enough, I guess. J&J's single-shot COVID vaccine, you remember the summation here given by Greg, was supposed to be the catalyst for the country's return to normal. I don't know that it was ever all that responsibility hung on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but it certainly would have helped. But it was one of three things that I think would have been the catalyst for the country's return to normal. The other two things being Pfizer vaccine and Moderna vaccine. But instead, it's apparently sparking confusion and finger-pointing between the states and the Biden administration. And see if we can find out why. Almost 3 weeks after the FDA authorized the shots, no one appears to be able to explain why immunizations are lagging, but they're not. I mean, our immunizations, I keep hearing, are breaking records day to day. Is it just immunizations with Johnson & Johnson vaccine that's lagging? Some states are thought to be intentionally holding back shots. Others say it takes time to inoculate populations like the homebound. Sure. Again, the needle has to be long enough to go through the walls and into their living rooms. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, senior Biden administration officials have met privately to try and determine what happened. 2 senior administration officials believe states are conserving their J&J supplies. How is it just a belief? Like, hello, state, are you conserving your J&J supplies until there's enough to reach underserved communities and specific groups like teachers or the disabled? No, we're not. No. Well, then in that case, now that I have an answer, I'll write an article to that effect. As opposed to, we don't know what the answers are, but we'll write an article. I don't know. I'm very confused by this. Multiple state officials say they're using whatever they get as soon as they get it. So obviously, all right, some states are saying that, and some states are, I guess out of the 50, you're going to run into a state or two that's actually literally confused about what they're doing with the Johnson & Johnson shots. But how many of them could there really be? What's clear is that around 2.3 million of the 4.3 million doses of the vaccine delivered have actually been administered. So, a little more than half. That's good. Between 140,000 and 200,000 doses have made it into people's arms in recent days, according to the CDC. But, yeah, that's a little imperfect as a metric. How many doses have made it into people's arms? Well, several in recent days. Well, how about like yesterday and the day before that? What do you mean in recent days? Can you pin that down for me a little bit? The bumpy J&J rollout highlights the challenges the White House still faces in ensuring timely and steady administration of the COVID-19 vaccines, with President Joe Biden eyeing July 4th as Independence Day, which of course it is, but they put it in scare quotes here because it's independence from the virus, because we were dependent on it's a very bad metaphor, really. We're never dependent on the virus, but I see what you're getting at. Freedom is what you mean. We like to conflate the two, and it's not really always a great comparison. Because it takes just 2 weeks to achieve immunity with the J&J shot compared to 5 or 6 weeks for 2-dose shots from Pfizer and Moderna, respectively, the absence of enough one-and-done vaccinations has a ripple effect, slowing down the overall pace of the rollout. Am I sure that they're doing a good job staying focused here at I don't know. I mean, to me, I don't think that's the feeling among the people who are interested in getting vaccinated, because a growing number of people have been getting access to that first shot, and they've been very pleased with that, and they don't feel like things are slowed down. Of course, people still waiting for their first shot still feel that way, but the Biden administration officials have repeatedly warned the initial J&J deployment would be rocky, since there was only a limited supply of shots available in the opening weeks. That part I remember, and makes sense. Problems could also be compounded by reporting lags, but they expect the distribution to smooth out when more vaccine becomes available at the end of this month. Okay. You can't distribute vaccine equitably if there aren't enough doses to distribute, one senior health official said. Well, I don't know about that. You can do it equitably, but then you run out. I mean, that's all. You can't distribute it to everyone if there aren't enough doses, yes, but that's not the same thing as equitably. The White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Because states have the final say in how their allotments are distributed, some are using it on populations that are hard to reach. Others are putting speed over equity and sending out the shots broadly. It may be a little bit slower rollout because everybody is trying to decide how to best use this particular vaccine. Again, I think the problem is they just didn't make all that much available initially. And then they were going to ramp up production in partnership with Merck, right? And so now they're doing that, and things would get faster later. What's still mysterious is, I guess, that there was still another, what would they say, 2.4 million out of, or 2.3 million out of 4.3 million doses delivered. So I guess the question is, what happened to that 2 million doses? Where are they? But all I'm getting from this article is some states said they did this with theirs, and other states said they did that with theirs. Okay. But both states are saying they sent them out for administration to be put in people's arms, just on a different basis. Some are, well, I guess, is it that they say some states are reserving it for the hard-to-reach population, and they're so hard to reach that we haven't reached them yet? Because that didn't sound like what they were saying either. All right, well, let's see if there's anything more here. West Virginia is initially using the J&J shot to inoculate its homeless and homebound population. That's an interesting contrast there. People who have no homes and people who won't leave the ones they've got. But I see they're both hard to reach. That makes good sense, I think. As well as those with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in congregate settings. Okay. Again, difficult to reach reliably, possibly with second shots, although probably no more difficult, well, congregate settings. I suppose I'm not 100% clear on what that means, and maybe that means that they won't be reliably in the same place the way, say, nursing home residents would be. They will literally be going nowhere, whereas congregate settings, I thought that might mean what they used to call, I guess this is the new term for group homes, congregate settings, unless it means that it's, sometimes they're in a group home and sometimes they're elsewhere. I don't know. By next week, health officials anticipate they will use up the entire first shipment of 15,500 J&J shots, and those vaccine appointments are already lined up, according to Clay Marsh, West Virginia's COVID-19 czar. And by all reports, they were doing great, West Virginia, with the administration of their vaccines. So no surprise that we also find out, look, they got 15,000, they're going to use them all up. I think that people are getting a feel for how to do this the best, Marsh said. We're just trying to build that framework, logistics, the process, so we can move effectively and take advantage of this new opportunity. Great. Pennsylvania got 107,600 doses of J&J to vaccinate teachers and other school staff in an effort to get kids back into the classroom. As of Friday, nearly 83,900 shots had been administered, according to a health department spokesman. So that's a pretty good record. Maryland deployed its shots to a variety of settings, such as health departments, hospitals, and 2 mass vaccination sites. Have they put any in on the arms? I don't know. They wanted to make sure they're being flexible, et cetera, et cetera. That's good. Earlier this month, scientists and public health experts cautioned against recommending J&J shots for specific groups, worried about perceptions that the shot is different from others. I think that was a good idea then for Maryland to say, well, we're giving it to teachers. So in one state, I heard they're giving all the homeless people this one. This must be the worst shot. Well, they're also giving it to teachers in this state. Of course, some people could come to the same conclusion. Well, you treat teachers so poorly that they might as well be homeless. But I think that would go a long way, really, to say, no, we're just administering it differently. And there's great reasons for using it for the homeless population, which is, you don't know where you're going to find them or if you'll be able to find them for that second shot. Anyway, let's see. White House coronavirus coordinator Jeff Zients, how does he pronounce it? Zients? I don't know. Even warned states that the White House could intervene with technical assistance if it learns states were doing what? Doing something. Creating perceptions that the shot is different from others. The J&J shot was shown in trials to be less overall effective. That's their wording. Less overall effective than Pfizer or Moderna, but provides strong protection against hospitalization and death. It works just fine, and you should take it, especially if hospitalization and death is what you're worried about. I think the federal government's tried to provide some leadership on that. That's helpful. Who's speaking here? Plessia, who was introduced earlier, I'm sure, in the story, but we must have skipped it. One of the public health officials. But as we've seen, states are attentive to and respectful of federal guidance, but they do what works for them. Meanwhile, governors are sensitive to how vaccination data is displayed. In private weekly calls with the White House, they've pressed Biden administration officials to break out how many doses the federal government is responsible for administering. Worried, CDC's public tracker holds states accountable for doses that aren't under their control, I say. The CDC will be providing additional reports that show vaccination data in states by both federal and state channels, according to senior administration officials. The official emphasized that the agency is focused on the number of Americans who have been vaccinated as a whole, which is relevant for disease control rather than the channel by which the shot was administered. States have access to that information through a system called Tiberius. Okay, good name. I don't know. It's unclear how many doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine have been administered by federal vaccine sites, retail pharmacies, and federally qualified health centers, which states don't control. As of March 10th, about 50,000 J&J doses were shipped to California, Texas, and Florida for administration at federal sites run by FEMA, according to a spokesman. Additional 23,000 were in transit at that time, the official said. FEMA didn't answer additional requests for comment about how many more doses of the vaccine were delivered in the last 2 weeks and how many have been administered overall. So, okay, I get the state governor's point, right? If you say, well, we've sent 50,000 doses to Montana, and Montana says it's delivered 0 of them into arms. Well, if the answer is, well, you sent it to a federal site that's located in Montana, but they haven't given those shots to us, the state. They have retained control of them, and for all we know, they've given them out, but they don't tell us. But yet your stats make it look like Montana is not doing anything. When we, the state, get control of vaccines, we put it in people's arms. I don't know what they're doing with theirs. I assume they're injecting it into people, but I don't know. And I can't report for them. Weekly allocations for the J&J vaccine have changed in recent days as well, according to accounts of several internal senior leadership briefings obtained by Politico. At the beginning of the month, the administration allocated 3.9 million doses to states, a federal program that funnels doses to retail pharmacies, safety net health providers, and to pilot vaccination sites run by FEMA. Since that time, the doses have rolled out sporadically. The administration originally told states that they may not receive more doses of the vaccine until the end of March. Then, according to one briefing dated March 11th, the administration said it planned on allocating another 400,000 doses across the country the following week. Another briefing dated March 15th said the administration had actually bumped up that allocation total to 600,000. It's still unclear exactly how many J&J doses have gone through quality control and are awaiting shipment. Despite the increasing allocation numbers over the last 2 weeks, the vaccination rate remained low. And that's actually it. That's the end of the article. And what a stupid, it feels like an idiotic way of ending this thing. Despite the increasing allocation over the last 2 weeks. Allocation. Like, yeah, we're going to ship you 600,000. The vaccination rate remained low. How many of the doses that we're going to send you have you administered? 0. Well, that's low. Is this a fair... Does this read the same way to the rest of you? It felt like a giant waste of time. I haven't learned a goddamn thing about what's going on with this Johnson & Johnson thing. One guy says it was a terrible article. I'm sorry, but that was either poorly organized or, what this is a report from, let's single them out here. Aaron Banco and Rachel Rubin, Roubein, that basically, I guess they got an assignment from an editor. Then there's a lot of confusion about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine administration. Find out about that. And they start off with the premise, there's lots of confusion about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine administration. We asked lots of people and got a bunch of different answers. And in conclusion, we are still confused about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and administration and the manufacturing numbers and who does what. The one thing I learned in here is that the state's governors are upset with, and I think fairly upset with the idea that vaccine could be shipped to federal entities located within their states, and that the current reporting system will say that those things arrived in their states, but they aren't under the control of the state government, and so they don't know anything about their administration and can't do anything to speed their administration directly, but they're sort of counted against their vaccination rate. That makes sense. That was helpful. But that would be true of any kind of vaccine, not just the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So, I don't know. Did you learn anything? Did you figure this out? If you did, send us a tweet or something, or email us and see if you can make heads or tails out of this piece. Because I really thought we'd be doing ourselves some good by reading it, and we did not. I didn't. Not me, anyway. Okay. Do we take that risk now with another article that Greg sent us that's not about the vaccine? I think we might be able to figure this one out. It's a Rachel Bidikofer piece. I guess, look at that. It's on Substack, which means something, because people have been talking about Substack and how, in some cases, how horrible or weirdly rigged it is has been a new hot topic. I guess lots of people have migrated their, I don't know what, their newsletters. If they had newsletters already, they migrated them to Substack. It was, I think, designed as an opportunity to monetize newsletter writing. But and so widely advertised as a great way to monetize your work. But I recently, I don't know. I didn't read the articles because who cares about Substack, quite honestly. But, besides people who have, newsletters, which I don't. But I heard somebody or saw somebody briefly proposing that the idea that Substack was seeding their startup, essentially, by paying certain newsletter authors directly in order to guarantee that there was at least some solid core of writers who were profiting and making a living from migrating their newsletters to Substack, but it wasn't necessarily that they were generating enough subscriptions through Substack to make ends meet, but rather that Substack was paying them to say that they were distributing their newsletters through Substack and making a living, but not acknowledging that that was a subsidized living with, burning up Substack's startup money. So I don't know. Also, who cares? But if you're thinking about starting a newsletter and putting it on Substack because everybody on Substack is making a bundle with their newsletters, you would be upset and disappointed about that, and you have the right to be. So let me know if that's the case. But here's the actual article. Survey finds Republican voters' views on Democratic fragility. Let's find out what that is. May contribute to rise in radicalism within party increased support of anti-democratic attitudes and policies. What? You know what? I might throw this one out and say let's save it for Wednesday when Greg can help us make sense of this piece. It's also rather lengthy, but that is a headline and a half. That makes no sense to me. So, all right, well, we'll pocket that one. Maybe we should pocket it literally so we can come back and dissect it later. Or I'll give it to you, and you can dissect it and see if you can make sense out of it. But the Johnson & Johnson story has broken my brain, and I can't go on. All right, let's see. Still got a couple other ideas to check in on here. Oh, you know what? This seemed like an interesting one. Let's see. Does this feel like something we can do inside of the time between now and the break? No, it doesn't. So let's switch gears. I had here, this is good, and good transitional news because it's COVID-19. J.J. McNabb happened to catch this and make an excellent point. The news she points to here is a CNN article. Idaho legislature she comments on this article, has halted its session until April due to a COVID-19 outbreak among lawmakers and staff. No huge surprise there. CNN has the report on it. It's relatively short, and then they get around to the real point of the thing at the end. But J.J. McNabb saves us the time by reminding us that, she said on Saturday, the 20th, as I understand, 14 days ago at the Idaho State Capitol, it was something of a different scene. And 14 days, of course, that's 2 weeks. What do you know about COVID and 2-week time periods? Yes, 14 days ago at the Idaho State Capitol, she's attached another article, this one from NBC News. That would have been the coverage of the Idaho protesters burning those masks at the state capitol, rallying against mask mandates. You may have seen the video distributed on Twitter. You may have seen it distributed by NBC News, whose article is attached here. I don't know if we commented on it at the time. It happened, on a Saturday. We weren't on the air. But I got a lot of time commenting on it during the weekend, that weekend, on Twitter, just because it was a very weird and bizarre scene watching them burn all the masks, and they had their kids there too, and the kids were having a great time burning these masks, dropping them into whatever it was they were burning, and whatever it is they were burning that stuff in. But they're tossing the masks in there, and lots of people pointing out, well, a lot of those masks, when they burn, maybe release some chemicals which aren't really super great for you, and you shouldn't have the kids there breathing all that in. And if you're going to be standing that close to a fire releasing potentially toxic chemicals, well, ironically, you would want to be wearing a mask or a respirator of some kind to try and, lessen the danger from all of that. But they don't believe in anything they can't see, microbes or toxic chemicals. So there they were having a good time doing it. And of course, the other thing that I found interesting was in the video you can see there's an adult there distributing, I guess you could say, the masks for burning from out of a giant, plastic bag of them. I don't know if it was a garbage bag or what, but anyway, it bothered me a little bit to see that they were handing out used masks to kids admittedly they were going to burn them, not reuse them or anything. That would have been even more dangerous. But the guy who was taking them out of the bag produces a big, menacing looking hunting knife and is flinging them out of this bag using the knife. In other words, he's not touching it. He's not dumb enough to stick his hand in a bag of used masks and throw them to the kids. But the kids, of course, don't have, or at least weren't displaying their own giant menacing hunting knives to pick those masks up with. They were picking them up with their bare hands. So the adult, quote unquote, adult on the scene is smart enough to know you don't stick your hand in a bag of used masks. But what's he doing? He's tossing them to kids who are not smart enough to know that. And it was all very upsetting. Anyway, so 14 days passed between the "we don't need no stinking masks" protest outside the Idaho State Capitol. Lo and behold, 14 days later, inside the very same state capitol, a COVID-19 outbreak has closed down the operations of the state legislature. The article about CNN will go into some detail about that, but really, what do you need to know? I'll give you these details. As of Friday morning, there were 10 reported or confirmed cases of COVID-19 among House representatives, staff, and Senate staff. That is, again, a dopey way of putting it. I guess that means there's no state senators had gotten it, but at least some members of the lower house of the Idaho state legislature had gotten it, plus staffers on both sides. That is a little awkward to have to express things that way. And anyway, the Idaho House Speaker, who is a Republican, Scott Bedke, perhaps I've pronounced that correctly, told reporters during a news conference on Friday that the legislature was adjourned out of, quote, an abundance of caution and to, quote, break the cycle of this hoax and myth and thing that doesn't affect anybody and is all made up gobbledygook. Anyway, so far, so good. So we'll see whether that spreads any further and be right back after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're a little bit behind with the music because we're a little late in getting it started. But, okay, let's see. We'll keep an eye on the situation in the Idaho State Legislature. Maybe Joan can find out something a little about it. But fingers crossed for the people there who actually believed in the virus and were doing everything they could to avoid it, and who may have contracted it or be put in danger of contracting it, whereas to hell with the rest of you who thought it was a hoax and thought you could get away with burning masks. I hope you all got it. So there you go. I know there are better people out there than me. Talk to them if you're looking for uplifting, more broadly humanistic or even spiritual approach to how to deal with the virus. Me, I say mask burning idiots should all get it. And that's sad and everything, but so what? That's the way it is. I don't know what to tell you. But once again, it never works out that way. The people who are out there burning the masks and saying it's all a hoax and it was all stupid and the masks were never necessary and they actually harm your health, but went home and are probably doing just fine. And they left behind all the germs for the people in the Idaho State Legislature to get sick with instead. But there are probably some mask burners in there too. And, it never works that the people who should by rights be contracting it from things like this end up getting it. But, well, maybe from time to time. And then, of course, when they do that, they repent of their foolishness and they get sympathetic profiles in the newspaper. It reminded me that I have actually seen one, and it's tucked away in the pocket here somewhere. And I think it was even Idaho specific, now that I think about it. Let's see, where was that one? See if I can find it readily. Probably not. There we are. Idaho Statesman. All right, well, maybe we can, I don't know, should I bring that one up now and we can follow up with Joan on it? I don't want to make her spend the whole segment on Idaho news, but Idaho Statesman, Idaho man thought, quote, the virus would disappear the day after the election. He was wrong. And how wrong was he? Basically, guess who got this thing the day after the election? Well, it wasn't the day after the election, but he did get it. And, here you go. This is a good lesson to those of you who willingly went along with me a second ago saying, good, I hope they get it, because you shouldn't. He's got it, and okay, here's his face, and he's a real human being, and it's like, oh man, he really shouldn't have gotten that. But I don't know, who else should get it? It's got to get somebody. If it's got to get somebody, let it get them, I guess. Paul Russell is the name of the guy. He was driving back to Boise from Florida by way of Houston. He's a truck driver. In case you were wondering, wow, that's a long drive. Why are you doing it? Well, that's the job. Russell, 63, knew he was sick by the time he crossed into Idaho. When was this happening? It was early November. What do you know? So maybe it was like the day after the election. I didn't know if I was infected with COVID or what, he said. My buddy was about an hour behind me. He caught up with me in Twin Falls. He told me I didn't look very good at all. The next few weeks are a blur, Russell said. He spent more than 2 weeks in a St. Luke's Health System hospital, becoming one of 19 patients enrolled in a clinical trial for a new test for a new drug for use in COVID-19. I'm curious what that was. I'm going to click through and see if I can find out, because there's a whole, here we are. What do you know? It's a human monoclonal antibody by the brand name of, who cares? But it's a different one. It's not Regeneron. Actemra, I'm guessing, Actemra. So that's nice that it's a monoclonal antibody. Remember, that's the miracle cure that Donald Trump said he was going to give to every senior in America who got COVID to save their lives. So here's somebody who actually got one, but not from Donald Trump. He was going to give him Regeneron. I don't know whether, maybe he thought it would be okay to give him the Actemra instead. Or maybe that's the Eli Lilly equivalent. He did mention that there was that, and doesn't say who manufactures this one. But, all right. Well, they're working on that study in the Idaho hospitals. I just thought it was interesting because that has come up. It comes up every day that I count and then recount how many people have gotten coronavirus and how many people have died from it since Trump said, if you get it or if you need it, I'll give it to you for free. It really is remarkable. And every once in a while I see people saying, well, they do make monoclonal antibody therapies available. You just got to know where to look, and you can contact your doctor. And if you really hustle, you can get the stuff. But I don't know whether that was supposed to be a counter argument to Trump doing what he did. But, I was like, to me, telling everybody, you vulnerable seniors, they say you're vulnerable. I think you're really terrific and wonderful. You're my favorite people. But for this, you're vulnerable. So am I. Many people don't know I'm a senior. You remember the whole routine. But I'm going to give it to you for free. I'm going to get it to you for free. And it's a miracle and it's going to save your life is not within 100 miles of, well, if you go out there and you contact and you find the right doctor and you bust your ass for 2 weeks, you can find the stuff. It's too late at that point. But also, I'm going to give it to you for free is not the same as go find it. That's not really fulfilling your promise. Anyway, I just found that interesting. So now he's getting this therapy. Hopefully it works. Idaho's fall surge provided more clinical trial volunteers from St. Luke's than there were enrolled in the entire country of Spain, in case you were wondering how we were doing relative to other countries. Now, Russell said, he can't work anymore. That seems like the sort of thing that would upset him, and he might blame somebody for it. But the long-haul trucker has become a COVID-19 long hauler. He survived the virus, but it did long-term damage to his body. I'm going to be on oxygen for the rest of my life, according to my doctor, he said. Russell didn't want to give his wife whatever he had. That's smart. So when he arrived back home in Boise, he parked and went straight to the couple's travel trailer. That Monday, he got a COVID-19 test. It was positive. He hibernated, he says, in quotes, in the trailer for 2 days, he said. But come Wednesday morning, he said he was really extremely miserable. I asked my wife to get a hold of transportation to get me to the hospital. The ambulance picked him up and took him to St. Luke's in Boise. His memory is foggy, but he recalls being sent to the intensive care unit within hours of arriving. He stayed in the ICU for 4 or 5 days on high-flow oxygen. At one point, a nurse put his wife on speakerphone. She told him how much she loved him because she didn't know if I was going to make it through the night, he said. That was the night I got a visit from my dad, he said. My dad's been gone for about 3 years. So you can guess what kind of visit that was. Well, I think that's probably more than we need to know about the guy, but it gives you a good picture of it and reminds you that they are, real people, despite the fact that they believed that this whole thing was a hoax and it was going to disappear. Yeah. So down here it says, before I came down with the virus, I was one of those jackasses who thought the virus would disappear the day after the election. I was one of those conspiracy theorists, he said, in case you didn't think I'd read enough to convince you that he was, well, really, truly one of the people who I, offhandedly would say deserved to get it. Well, he admits that he was one of those people. He might even say I deserve to get it, but he doesn't go so far as to say that. However, instead, he was the one in the hospital with COVID-19 a week after the election. All these people that are saying that it's fake, blah, 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 they're lying to themselves, he said. Well, that's true. COVID gave me a foggy memory. I occasionally have speech problems. His scans show scarred lungs. He has a pain in different parts of his body. He has dizzy spells. His heart races when he gets up to do anything. So, cautionary tale. You've heard it a million times, but this one's Idaho specific. So they should have let that guy make a statement to the mask burners and tell them, you're being foolish. You should all go home and stop trying to give it to the Idaho state legislature. But too late for that one. And so they did. So there you go. I don't know. That was somewhat, puts a capstone on the COVID discussion, I think, for the day. Let's see. Other things that I wanted to cover with you. This one, a little bit off the beaten path. And then, let's see. Oh, there were a couple other things from the Twitter timeline. One I'll share that was happened this morning here. New news reported here by Stephen Fowler, a Georgia reporter, who tweets new news that Republican Representative Jody Hice, do I have the pronunciation right? A leading voice in pushing false claims about Georgia's election system, announced that he would challenge Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger next year with former President Trump's blessing. So there you have it. That's a strange move, but I guess he thought he could get a Trump endorsement there and rake in a whole bunch of money. So that's the headline. Representative Jody Hice, who pushed false elections conspiracies, announces that he will be running to replace the very few Republicans in Georgia that actually stood up for election integrity and said, no, President Trump is full of it and he's lying. So, well, there's your result there. Rather than accept the truth, they will campaign to replace that person. So hopefully we'll get Raffensperger's testimony on record before he becomes irrelevant, and we can share that with the court system. Let's see, a couple other stories that caught my attention over the weekend, and I would have noted in passing on Twitter. Let's see, I'll go back to where we were with that. Oh, yes, there was the J.J. Manchin, or J.J. McNabb part, not Manchin, but let's see. The other stories that, now I have to scroll all the way back, so unfortunately we'll do, I guess right up alongside the Jody Hice story, The Hill blaring out the story today that Kevin McCarthy will be hiring a former Trump political staffer to lead his political operation inside the House and for his reelection and heading into the 2022 midterms. Kevin McCarthy hires Brian Jack, former President Trump's White House political director, to lead his own congressional political operation, which normally makes a great deal of sense. It's the kind of move you would see happening all the time when the Republican Party was normal and functioning normally. But now, of course, it's just taking the people who designed and executed the insurrection and moving them to direct the political operation inside the legislature, which was the target of that insurrection, on the staff of the leadership that couldn't get it together to oppose the insurrection launched against it on January 6th. So a name to watch, I suppose, Brian Jack. We'll keep an eye on that guy and remind you of his status as a anti-government insurgent now being placed inside the legislature and the political operation there. Terrific. Just fantastic. And I guess that could bring us over to the discussion right on the way into the weekend. Brian Beutler was pointing out, as I recall, probably on Friday afternoon, that it looks like the possibility for putting together a commission of some sort to look into the insurrection is unlikely to come off because, of course, they are insisting on putting together a bipartisan commission, equally divided between Republicans and Democrats, to look into the insurrection sponsored by the Republican Party. And what do you know? They want seats on the commission. It's like giving Confederates seats on the Fort Sumter Commission, of course. And basically, the problem is twofold. One, that they're doing it. Two, that it was still a live idea in the minds of American legislators that evenly divided bipartisan commissions will ever do anything but deadlock so that they can't get anything done is astounding. I mean, how many times do we have to go through this? But, it's just super crazy. Here's how Brian put it in his tweet. I guess this was, so this is the legitimate Friday, March 19th. Republicans are engaged in another vast and flagrant Trump cover-up. That's the real headline that ought to be here with this NBC News piece that he's included, which in fact says, by way of headline, not happening. That's in quotes. Not happening. Prospects dim for a January 6th riot commission amid partisan disputes. But Brian has it right. What's happening here is a Republican cover-up. They are going to oppose setting up anything other than a evenly divided commission. And even if you agree to their demand that it be evenly divided, they'll probably block the legislation or do their best to block it anyway because they don't want any investigation going on. But if there has to be an investigation, it should be one that they can obstruct. Republican and Democratic leaders can't agree on who will be on the commission and what exactly it will study. And I think also lots of people reading this article and predicting, sometimes honestly and sometimes tongue-in-cheek, but basically saying, look, what's going to end up happening is that they are going to want to have equal time spent investigating Antifa for starting the riot when Antifa, 1, didn't, and 2, was nowhere near it, and 3, had nothing whatsoever to do with it. But they're going to insist on wasting commission resources on this thing. Leanne Caldwell is the byline here for NBC News' piece. Momentum has dissipated for the creation of a 9/11 style commission, which might be a good thing because it was always terrible, to study the January 6th attack on the Capitol, jeopardizing efforts to launch a bipartisan and comprehensive examination of what took place that day. The real point that Brian's making is you can't do it on a bipartisan basis because one of the parties in the word that's the root of partisan, bipartisan as well, one of the two parties, partisan, in this deal launched this attack as a partisan political play, a ploy to overturn the results of the election. You can't give them seats on the commission. Al-Qaeda wanted seats on the 9/11 Commission. We said no. Sure. Lawmakers are growing increasingly pessimistic that an agreement on establishing such a commission can be reached. Congressional leaders remain deadlocked on the scope and makeup of the panel. What a surprise. With Democrats continuing to insist that they should have more seats on it, because I guess they would view it as a special, select committee instead of a independent commission. And unlike after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, when Congress united, the distrust between the two parties in the aftermath of the riot has only grown in intervening months. Well, duh. One of the two parties launched the attack. Of course there's going to be distrust between the two parties. And good reason to say, no, you shouldn't have equal say in what happens. You launched the attack. I mean, it's idiotic. But here we are. And guess what? My instinct is that it's not happening, said Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, a member of the Republican leadership and close ally of Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. Private discussions between party leaders have been stalemated for weeks, aides say. Republicans balked at House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's initial proposal that President Joe Biden name 3 people to the panel, and each of the 4 congressional leaders named 2, likely giving Democrats 7 seats and Republicans 4 seats. McConnell has also objected to the scope, saying that if Pelosi wants to look at extremist groups involved in the attack, like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, i.e. the ones who are being indicted for it, then the commission should also study other extremists who are not involved in the attack, like Antifa. Now, it goes on to say Pelosi adamantly disagrees, but that's it. That's all it says, as opposed to like, well, Pelosi adamantly disagrees, because that's just idiotic. I mean, well, if you're going to look at the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, then you should look at people with peanut allergies as well, because, I'm sick of those bastards. It's ruining all the fun of having peanut butter sandwiches. What? What are you talking about? If he had at least stuck with the big lie, or subsection of the big lie that says, well, if we're going to study the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, we should study Antifa too, because they were there. But he's actually saying they weren't there, but they should be studied anyway because they're extremist groups. But it's a commission studying the attack, not extremist groups. And nobody says that. Like in the the author of the article, I'm just reporting the facts. Well, how about, just a little hint of something that says, but that doesn't make any goddamn sense in the world. Also, Pelosi happens to adamantly disagree with it because it doesn't make any goddamn sense. But I can't help you. He said it, and I have to report it. The main problem, the article then yada-yadas on, the main problem is the scope of the investigation, Pelosi said Wednesday on MSNBC's Morning Joe. We want it to be bipartisan. Not really, but neither side appears willing to relent. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy of California on Thursday called Pelosi's proposal a partisan play. I think the path forward is very easy, McCarthy said, even though he won't be able to accomplish it, calling for an equal number of Republicans and Democrat-appointed seats. Unfortunately, the only person who's opposing that is everybody. Speaker Pelosi. I see. A majority of the public, 53%, supports the creation of an independent commission to look into the attacks, according to a Monmouth University poll. 76% said the commission should examine the growth of militant groups, and 70% said the role of white nationalists should be part of the scope. Pelosi wanted to introduce legislation to create a commission in mid-February, but after Pelosi distributed her draft discussion to Republican and Democratic leaders, McConnell gave a scathing criticism on the Senate floor, calling it partisan by design. But it should also examine people who weren't there, which is not partisan, because I'm me. McCarthy said it seemed Pelosi, quote, wants to put politics to this rather than get to the real answer, even though a political party attacked the Congress. The widening schism between the parties is still on display. 12 Republicans voted against giving the Congressional Gold Medal to the U.S. Capitol Police and Washington's Metropolitan Police Department because the resolution used the word insurrectionists, which they were, to describe the Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol, which, the alternative was to say Trump supporters, and they would have opposed that, too. The 9/11 Commission was equally divided between Republican and Democratic appointees, co-chaired by former New Jersey Governor Thomas Kean, a Republican, and former Representative Lee Hamilton, a Democrat from Indiana, with both parties having subpoena power. It took 12 hearings and more than a year to write an extensive report that led to major government and intelligence reforms. I support a 9/11 Commission to get the facts. I don't support a 9/11 Commission to advance one party's politics at the expense of another, even though one party launched the attack. And the commission that Speaker Pelosi talked about is stacked. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana said, any fair-minded person knows that, and that's why I don't think it'll happen, and if it does happen, it won't have any credibility. Well, that's the play, and amazingly and ironically, it's a partisan play that Republicans are pulling here. They will say, well, either you have to give us the right to completely foul the works of this commission, or if you had to, if you wanted to actually come to some conclusion, you're going to have to make it such that the party that launched the attack doesn't have equal say in investigating the attack that it launched. And if you do that, well, then it's unfair because it's not equal. And everyone knows things that aren't equal are unfair. This is just like where they say, well, if it isn't bipartisan, it's no good, right? It's just inherently a bad thing. Well, I don't know. If you're working with the evil bastards party, you're not really going to want any of them having input on things because they're evil and bastards as well. So, two good reasons not to include them in the lawmaking. But the newspaper says that bipartisan things are the only things that are good, and so we should want that for some reason. Anyway, Brian goes on to comment on this a couple more times, and to a greater extent. Let's read some of that commentary. And this is another big part of our problem. We said there was at least two problems operating here. One, we looked at the partisan issue problem, but then there's this. Conventions at legacy outlets, he's talking about the traditional news media, basically forbid reporting that this kind of thing plainly, it forbids reporting that kind of thing. I could change the wording to this, but it basically forbids reporting that kind of thing plainly. That is, remember his initial statement that, I'm going to clear this up for you, I swear. Republicans, by doing this, are engaged in another vast and flagrant Trump cover-up. Okay, so traditional media then basically forbids reporting this kind of thing plainly. But it's not 100% what's happening, and everyone knows it. They can't, he's saying, just say, well, what's really happening here is Republicans have set up the commission for failure. If it is equally divided, it won't be able to make any conclusions worth anything. If it is not equally divided, they will say it is inherently untrustworthy because it is biased against Republicans. But we aren't asking for a report on Republican activity here. The insurrection was Republican run and Republican generated, and I'm sorry that that's the case. Well, I'm not sorry. I mean, they suck. They're horrible people. The people that did it, the worst among them. But they did do it. And if you want to know what happened, what if the answer is they did it? Right? How can you come to that conclusion if they can block a report saying that they did it? Or how can you come to that conclusion if they can convince the news media that that conclusion is wrong and unfair because it blames them, even though they did it? But the newspapers, what do we do with this? We can't say that Republicans are being unfair and biased here because that's against our rules, even though everybody can see that that's what's happening. But he continues here. Republicans oppose any commission empowered to look beyond narrow security failures unless they're allowed to mire it in Antifa whataboutism. So at the most, even if they actually manage to get this commission started, they would say the most we'll allow is to say, well, what really happened here was a failure of the security system. And by the way, we've already set this up. We believe that the failure is Nancy Pelosi's fault somehow, even though we've never explained how that is and how Mitch McConnell, escaped blame for controlling the other half of Congress. Brian concludes here, to me, the commission itself is a bit of a red herring since Democrats can, one, they can let Republicans vote the whole thing down, or two, they can impanel a joint committee, give it subpoena power, hold hearings in prime time, etc., and see how it goes. Or three, abolish the filibuster and create the commission anyhow if they think it's that important. But the reason the commission doesn't already exist is that Republicans know complicity runs deep into their party and they want to keep that fact concealed. And that's why they're doing what they're doing. And yeah, we don't get a chance to talk about that. And apparently the news media won't do it in general either. Anyway, I found the whole thing fascinating just because it's another sign of our system falling apart, and the news media and consumers of news just not knowing what to do with an outlandish situation that we were just told would never happen because democracy. And commenting again, if you haven't started watching it on Netflix, because you have Netflix already and just haven't gotten around to it. If you don't have Netflix, I can't blame you. But if you haven't watched Occupied, I recommend it to you. It is what a time to be watching a show like that when here we are sitting here unable to form a commission to investigate and attempt to overthrow the government because one of the two, the party that was behind that movement demands equal representation at the investigative table. And we don't know what to do with it. It's just beyond our understanding, I guess. And quite amazing. Okay, well anyway, that's it. Time for us to wrap things up today. Rather a disjointed show, but don't worry because there's a jointed show coming up afterwards, I guess. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam next. He has a whole plan and a list of things that he's going to talk about, and he's going to stick to it. And I will tell you what that was, but I've run out of time.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's got the Idaho legislature story, but he's also got this. The religious right is spreading horrific disinformation on social media to kill the Equality Act. And Pennsylvania cops post to a private Facebook group reveals dangerous levels of hostility, hate, racism, misogyny, and insubordination. Stay tuned.